The sound that finally stopped me wasn't the voicemail, it was the envelope. It was already waiting on my kitchen counter when I came home that night, propped neatly against the fruit bowl like it belonged there. Thick paper, cream-colored. My name written in my mother's handwriting, the careful cursive she used when she wanted something from me. I stood there longer than I should have, purse still on my shoulder keys, digging into my palm. The house was quiet in that too clean way, the kind of silence that makes every small noise feel louder than it should. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere in the wall, pipes clicked as the heat adjusted. I already knew what was inside that envelope. I just didn't know how far they were willing to go this time. I was 31 years old, standing in a townhouse I paid for with my own money, and my stomach still tightened the same way it had when I was 12, and my parents called me into the living room with that tone that meant I was about to be told what kind of daughter I'd failed to be. I set my purse down slowly and picked up the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No greeting, no warmth. Just a typed notice with my parents' names at the top and a sentence that made my vision blur for a second. We believe it is time to discuss the redistribution of family assets given recent changes in circumstances. Redistribution. I laughed once, sharp and disbelieving, the sound bouncing off the kitchen cabinets. Recent changes in circumstances meant my grandmother had died 6 months earlier and left her house to me. Not to my parents, not to my younger sister. To me. That alone had been enough to fracture what little piece our family had left. The paper went on. There were phrases like family fairness, long-term planning, shared responsibility. There was a suggested meeting time, a restaurant near the river. Neutral ground, my mother liked to call it whenever she planned to ambush someone. At the bottom, my father had added a line in pen. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I folded the paper carefully and set it back on the counter. My hands were shaking, but my face felt strangely calm, like something inside me had already stepped back and was watching this happen from a distance. This wasn't the first time they'd tried to reframe my life as something that belonged to them. It just felt different now. Earlier that day, my boss had called me into her office. Not angry, not unkind, just tired. She closed the door and told me that the board was reconsidering my promotion because of concerns about outside distractions. She didn't say my family's names, but she didn't need to. Everyone in the firm had heard about my mother showing up unannounced last month, crying loudly in the lobby because I hadn't returned her calls fast enough. I'd stood there nodding, apologizing, promising it wouldn't happen again while something bitter settled behind my ribs. On my way home, I'd stopped at the grocery store and stared too long at a display of birthday cakes, remembering how my last birthday had passed with nothing but a late-night text from my sister, asking if I could cover her car payment because she was short again. And now this envelope. I poured myself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, letting the cold seep into my fingers. The house smelled faintly like lemon cleaner and the soup I'd reheated and forgotten to eat. Outside, a dog barked. Somewhere down the block, a car door slammed. Ordinary sounds, an ordinary night. I thought about my grandmother Eleanor, about the way she used to sit at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and watch the light move across the floor as if she were memorizing it. About how she'd pressed my hand the last time I visited her in the hospital and said very quietly, "They're going to be angry with you. Let them." At the time, I hadn't understood what she meant. Now I did. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from my sister Paige. "Mom said you got the letter. We really need to talk. This affects all of us. All of us." I didn't reply. Instead, I walked into the spare bedroom I'd turned into a small office and opened the bottom drawer of my desk. Beneath old notebooks and a tangle of charging cords was a slim folder I hadn't touched since the funeral. Inside were copies of the will, the deed, and a business card with a name written on the back in my grandmother's shaky hand. Marianne Holt, estate attorney. I sat down hard in my chair, the leather creaking under my weight. My heart was pounding now, fast and insistent, but beneath it was something else, not fear, not guilt. Clarity. For most of my life, I'd been the reasonable one, the peacemaker, the daughter who paid quietly and apologized loudly, the one who smoothed things over so my parents could pretend we were a close family instead of a fragile arrangement built on obligation and favoritism. Paige had always been the priority. Her mistakes were learning experiences. Mine were disappointments. When she dropped out of college, my parents paid her rent. When I worked 2 jobs to finish school, they told me I was lucky to have such good work ethic. When she needed help, we all helped. When I needed space, I was selfish. And now they wanted the house. The house my grandmother had paid off decades ago. The house she'd left me deliberately carefully knowing exactly how my parents thought about money control and entitlement. I picked up the attorney's card and turned it over in my fingers. If I went to that dinner, it wouldn't be a conversation. It would be a negotiation they assumed they'd already won. They would talk about fairness and family while outlining exactly how much they expected me to give up. If I didn't go, they would escalate. I knew that too. My phone buzzed again, this time a voicemail notification. My father. I didn't listen to it. Instead, I stood up, walked back into the kitchen, and picked up the envelope one more time. I read it slowly, letting every word sink in. Redistribution. I folded it again, slid it into the trash, and pressed it down beneath coffee grounds and empty packaging. Then I went back to my office, sat down, and dialed the number on my grandmother's card. The phone rang twice. Law offices of Mary Ann Holt, a woman answered. How can I help you? I took a breath. A deep one. The kind you take when you're about to step somewhere you can't come back from. My name is Claire Lawson, I said. I think my family is about to try to take something that isn't theirs. There was a pause on the line. Not awkward, attentive. All right, the woman said gently. Why don't you tell me what's been happening? As I began to speak, I felt it. The shift. The moment where the story stopped being something that happened to me and became something I was finally choosing to face. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear and the old reflex to apologize, a quiet thought settled into place. They thought this was about a house. They had no idea what I was willing to do to protect my life. The first thing Mary Ann Holt said after I finished talking was, "Your grandmother was very careful." I was sitting at my desk phone pressed to my ear, staring at the faint scratch on the wall where I'd once bumped a bookshelf while moving in. My throat felt tight, like I'd been holding something back for years, and it was finally pushing up all at once. She came to see me twice. Mary Ann continued. Her voice was calm, steady, the kind of voice that didn't rush or soften the truth. Once when she was updating her will, and once afterward just to make sure everything was airtight. A strange ache spread through my chest. She never mentioned that. She didn't want to worry you, Mary Ann said, but she was very clear about her intentions. She wanted you protected. Protected. The word landed differently than love ever had in my family. Mary Ann asked me factual questions. Dates, names, who lived where, who paid what. She didn't interrupt when I described my parents' patterns, the way every conversation eventually bent toward what I owed them, how Paige always seemed to need rescuing, how I was expected to provide the rope. When I told her about the envelope and the dinner invitation, she exhaled slowly. They're going to try to pressure you into transferring partial ownership, she said, or into using the house as leverage, a loan, a guarantee, something that keeps their hands on it. That's what I thought, I said. And you should not agree to anything without representation, she said firmly. Not a dinner, not a casual conversation, not a family discussion. Once you start down that road, it gets harder to step back. I closed my eyes. My mother's voice floated up in my memory, already rehearsing the script. We just want to talk. Why are you being so dramatic? Families don't need lawyers. I need to ask you something, I said quietly. If I say no, what can they actually do? Mary Ann didn't hesitate. Very little. The house is yours. The deed is clean. The will was properly executed. Your parents can be upset. They can be loud. They can tell stories. But legally, they don't have a claim. A breath I hadn't realized I was holding slipped out of me. But she added people who feel entitled often don't stop at logic. They escalate. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, phone still in my hand, listening to the house settle around me. I thought about escalation, about my mother's tears turning sharper, about my father's quiet threats, about Paige's talent for playing both sides while never actually standing anywhere. By the time my phone buzzed again, I was ready. A text from my mother. Dinner is important. Your father and I are hurt you haven't responded. I typed, deleted, and retyped before finally sending a single sentence. I won't be attending dinner. If you have questions about the estate, you can direct them to my attorney. 3 dots appeared almost immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. The reply came from my father this time. You're making a mistake. I didn't respond. The silence that followed felt unnatural at first, like the pause before thunder. I went to bed early, but sleep came in shallow waves. I kept replaying my grandmother's face, the way she'd looked relieved when she told me the house was mine, as if she'd finally finished something important. The next morning, my sister called. I watched her name ring on my screen until it stopped. Then she called again and again. Finally, I answered. What are you doing? Paige demanded without greeting. I'm setting boundaries, I said. She scoffed. No, you're blowing things up. Mom hasn't stopped crying. I leaned against the kitchen counter, staring at the sunlight creeping across the floor. She cries when she doesn't get what she wants. That's unfair, Paige snapped. They just want things to be fair. I laughed softly. Fair for who? There was a pause. Then her voice shifted, sweetening. Claire, come on. You don't even live in the house full time. You work nonstop. You could sell it or refinance. Help everyone out. Everyone. I pictured Paige's new car, the one my parents had helped her buy. I pictured her apartment rent that always seemed to get covered somehow. I pictured the way no one had offered to help when my promotion stalled because my mother caused a scene at my office. I'm done being everyone's solution, I said. You're acting like they're villains, Paige said. They're our parents. They're adults, I replied, and I'm not their retirement plan. Her tone hardened. If you don't do this, don't expect us to just forgive you. Something inside me settled. I'm not asking you to. The line went quiet. Then she hung up. I went into work later that morning with my shoulders tight and my jaw aching from clenching it all night. The office buzzed with the usual low-hum phones ringing keyboards, tapping the smell of burnt coffee drifting from the break room. I made it to my desk before my supervisor Elaine appeared beside me. Can we talk? She asked. I followed her into her office, bracing myself. She closed the door and leaned against her desk. Your mother called again yesterday. My stomach dropped. I'm sorry. Elaine held up a hand. She didn't get through. Reception handled it. But this can't continue. I know, I said quietly. She studied me for a moment. Are you okay? The question caught me off guard. Not are you fixing it? Not is this handled? Just are you okay? I'm working on it, I said. Elaine nodded. Good, because you're good at your job. I don't want your family interfering with that. After she dismissed me, I sat at my desk feeling something unfamiliar. Support. That afternoon, Marianne emailed me a summary of my options. Protective steps, documentation, a recommendation to keep communication in writing only. She also suggested something I hadn't considered. If you believe the pressure will increase, she wrote, you may want to make proactive decisions about the property rather than reactive ones. I stared at that sentence for a long time. That night, I drove past my grandmother's house on my way home. I didn't stop. I just slowed enough to see the porch light glowing softly, the curtains she'd sewn herself still hanging in the windows. My parents' car wasn't there. I felt a strange mix of grief and resolve tighten in my chest. They thought time was on their side. They were wrong. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my phone buzzed again. A voicemail from my father. I listened to it this time. His voice was low-controlled. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Think carefully. I deleted the message. Then I opened my laptop, pulled up a search page, and typed 3 words. Real estate attorney, discreet sale. The night stretched on quiet and watchful as I took the first steps toward a future my family would never see coming. The first reply came just after midnight. I was still sitting at the kitchen table laptop, open a mug of cold tea beside me, when the email notification popped up. The subject line was simple. Confidential inquiry response. My pulse jumped sharp and immediate. I clicked it open. The sender was a man named Lucas Reed, senior advisor, private transactions. His message was polite, restrained, and carefully vague in a way that told me he knew exactly what kind of situation I might be in without asking me to spell it out. He wrote that he specialized in quiet sales, off-market listing situations where discretion mattered more than publicity. He asked if I would be available for a call the next afternoon. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Selling the house felt unthinkable and inevitable at the same time. It wasn't just a building. It was the one place in my life where I had never been made to feel small, where no one kept score, where my grandmother had baked bread on Sunday mornings and let me read on the floor until my legs fell asleep, where silence meant peace, not punishment. But it was also the lever my parents were trying to use to pry my life open. And levers only work if you let them. I replied yes. The next day moved slowly, thick with anticipation. Every email felt louder. Every footstep in the hallway at work made my shoulders tense. I caught myself checking my phone far too often, half expecting my parents to show up again despite my warning. They didn't. Instead, at 3 o'clock sharp, my phone rang. Claire Lawson, the voice said smoothly. This is Lucas Reed. Thank you for taking my call. We spoke for nearly an hour. He asked practical questions. Location, condition, title, occupancy. I answered carefully, deliberately, choosing my words the way you do when you're crossing a bridge you can't see the bottom of. When I asked what a quiet sale might realistically look like, he didn't sugarcoat it. If you want speed and discretion, he said, You trade off a little control. No open houses, no signage, no online listings, just vetted buyers who already know what they're looking for. And my family, I asked. There was a pause. If they're not on the deed, they don't need to know until it's done. That sentence settled into me with a weight that felt like both relief and fear. After we hung up, I closed my office door and sat very still. I could do this. But doing it meant crossing a line my family had spent my entire life teaching me never to cross. Later that evening, my mother showed up. I knew it was her before I even looked through the peephole. She had a way of standing too close to doors like proximity itself was a form of pressure. I didn't open it. The knocking started soft, then grew firmer. "Claire," she called, voice already trembling. "Please, we need to talk." I leaned my forehead against the door, eyes closed. "I know you're home," she said. "Your car's here." I didn't answer. Her tone shifted. "I don't understand why you're doing this to us." There it was, the pivot from request to accusation. "You're tearing this family apart," she continued. "Your father's blood pressure is through the roof. Paige can barely sleep. Is that what you want?" My fingers curled against the doorframe. "I raised you," she said. "I sacrificed everything for you." I thought of the way she used to borrow money from my savings as a teenager and forget to pay it back. The way she'd called me ungrateful when I asked for privacy. The way love had always come with an invoice. After several minutes, her voice dropped to something cold. "If you think a lawyer is going to protect you from this," she said quietly, "you're wrong. Families don't work that way." I waited until her footsteps retreated before I moved. That night, I slept badly. Dreams twisted around familiar scenes, my grandmother's house dissolving into paper, my parents' voices echoing from empty rooms. In the morning, there was a message from Lucas. "Potential buyers identified, cash ready, timeline flexible but fast." My hands shook as I typed back, "Let's proceed." The days that followed blurred into a strange, secret rhythm. Lucas arranged a discreet walkthrough with a couple relocating from out of state. A husband and wife in their 40s, quiet, respectful, their eyes lighting up in the kitchen the same way mine always had. They didn't talk about resale value. They talked about light and space and schools. It made the decision hurt and feel right all at once. We met at the house on a Tuesday afternoon. I walked through each room slowly before they arrived, touching the door frames, the banister, the windowsill my grandmother used to rest her elbows on when she watched the street. When they left, the wife squeezed my hand and said softly, "This place feels loved." I had to step outside to breathe. That evening, Lucas called. "They want it," he said. "Full cash, no contingencies. They're prepared to move quickly." "How quickly?" I asked. "A few weeks," he replied. "We can shorten that if needed." Needed. I thought about my parents' threats, about my job, about the way my life felt permanently paused, waiting for them to decide what I owed next. "Shorten it," I said. That night I packed a box. Just one. Important papers. Photos. My grandmother's old recipe cards. I didn't know where I would go yet, only that I needed options. Paige texted me just after midnight. "Mom says you're being influenced by outsiders." I stared at the message, then set my phone face down. 2 days later, my father left a voicemail. "You think you're smarter than us," he said. "You're not." I deleted it. The offer came in writing the following week. Numbers spelled out cleanly, decisively. I felt dizzy looking at them, not from greed, but from the sheer finality of it. Once this happened, there would be no pretending, no going back to polite lies and conditional peace. I signed. The moment the pen lifted from the paper, something inside me loosened and tightened at the same time. I went home that night and stood in the middle of the living room, the echo of my footsteps sounding strange and hollow. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though I wasn't sure to whom. Outside, the sky darkened. Somewhere nearby, a radio played. A dog barked. Life went on, unaware that the foundation of my family was quietly shifting beneath their feet. They thought they were cornering me. They didn't realize I was already gone. The first sign that they knew something was wrong came on a Thursday morning, the kind of gray, uneventful day that usually slid by unnoticed. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when my phone rang. Not a call, a group message. My parents, Paige, all in one thread. "Why is there a stranger asking about the house?" My chest tightened. I stared at the screen pulse thudding in my ears. For a split second, the old instinct surged up, the reflex to explain, soften, deny. To pretend this was all a misunderstanding that could still be smoothed over if I just chose the right words. Then I remembered my father's voice on the voicemail. "You're not smarter than us," I typed slowly. "I'm handling my affairs privately. There's nothing for you to worry about." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. My mother replied, "We deserve to be informed. That house is part of this family." I set the phone down without answering. By noon, my office receptionist knocked on my door, her expression tight. "Your parents are downstairs," she said quietly. "They're asking for you by name." My stomach dropped hot and heavy. I followed her to the hallway and looked down into the lobby. My father stood rigid near the front desk, arms crossed, jaw clenched. My mother paced in tight circles, dabbing at her eyes with the tissue she'd probably brought just for this moment. Paige stood off to the side, arms folded, watching everything like an observer rather than a participant. I didn't go down. Instead, I walked back into my office, closed the door, and called security. When Elaine stepped in moments later, her face was pale but controlled. "This can't happen again," she said. "They're disrupting the workplace." "I know," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm handling it." She nodded. "You need to handle it fast." They were escorted out 10 minutes later. I didn't watch them leave. That afternoon, Lucas called. "They've been asking around," he said. "Nothing formal, just noise. We're still on track." "How much time do we have?" I asked. "A couple of weeks," he replied, "but I'd recommend minimizing contact. Pressure tactics usually escalate when people sense control slipping." Escalation. That night, my mother showed up again. This time she brought Paige. I watched through the window as they stood on my porch, Paige's arms wrapped around herself, my mother leaning in close, whispering something urgently. I didn't open the door. The knocking was louder this time, sharper. "Claire," Paige called, "please." I stayed still. "You don't have to do this alone," she said, her voice cracking. "We can fix this." "Fix this," meaning undo everything. My mother's voice cut in cold and precise. "If you don't open this door, you'll regret it." I felt a strange calm wash over me. "I already have," I said quietly, though they couldn't hear me. They left after 15 minutes. The next day, I met with Marianne in person for the first time. Her office smelled faintly of old books and polished wood. She listened as I described the lobby incident, the group messages, the knocking. "They're panicking," she said. "That's good information." "It doesn't feel good," I said. "No," she agreed, "but it's predictable." She slid a document across the desk. "This is a cease and desist template. We don't send it yet. We hold it." "Why?" I asked. "Because sometimes the knowledge that you can act is enough," she said, "and sometimes it isn't." I left her office feeling heavier and lighter all at once. The buyers scheduled their inspection for the following Monday. I walked through the house alone the night before, touching the walls, the shelves, the corners of rooms that had held me when nothing else had. I found myself standing in my grandmother's bedroom longer than anywhere else. The light was soft dust motes floating slowly through the air. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the silence settle. "They're scared," I said aloud as if she were listening. "I think you knew they would be." The inspection went smoothly. The buyers were kind, efficient, respectful. They asked questions about the plumbing, the roof, the windows. They didn't ask about my family. That evening, Paige called again. I almost didn't answer. "Dad found the listing," she said without preamble. "There is no listing," I replied. "He found out you're selling," she said. "He's furious." "I know," I said. There was a pause. "Is it true?" "Yes." Her voice dropped. "You're really doing this?" "Yes." "Without us?" "Yes." She swallowed. "You're choosing money over family." I laughed softly, surprised by the sound. "No, I'm choosing myself." She hung up. The final escalation came 3 days later. I came home to find an envelope taped to my door. Not mailed, hand-delivered. Inside was a letter written entirely in my father's handwriting. "If you proceed with this sale, you will destroy what little family you have left. We will not forgive you. You will regret this decision for the rest of your life." I folded it carefully and placed it in a folder labeled Documentation. Then I called Lucas. "I want to move up the closing," I said. There was a brief pause. "That's possible." "Do it," I said, "as soon as legally allowed." When I hung up, I stood in the center of my living room and felt it fully for the first time. The point of no return. I didn't cry, I didn't shake. I felt clear. That night I packed more boxes. Not everything, just what mattered. Papers, clothes, memories small enough to carry. I didn't know where I would land yet, only that I would not be here when they came back expecting access. As I sealed the last box, my phone buzzed again. A voicemail from my father. "You think this is over," he said. "It isn't." I deleted it without listening to the rest. Because he was wrong. This was just beginning. I moved before dawn. Not in a dramatic rush, not with tears or last looks, but with the quiet efficiency of someone who had already made peace with leaving. The boxes I'd packed sat stacked by the door like obedient witnesses. Important things only. Documents, clothes, my grandmother's recipes tied with twine. Everything else could wait or be replaced. The sky outside was still gray-blue, the air cool enough to make my breath visible as I carried the last box to the trunk. The house behind me looked the same as it always had, but it no longer felt like a refuge. It felt like a battleground I was smart enough to leave before the fighting turned physical. I locked the door, slid the key into my pocket, and drove away. By the time the sun rose, I was already pulling into the driveway of a small rental townhouse on the edge of the city. Nothing special. Neutral siding, clean lines, no history pressed into the walls. I had signed the lease under my name, only paid 3 months up front, and told no one except Mary Ann. Inside, it smelled like fresh paint and emptiness. I set my boxes down, sat on the floor, and let myself breathe. The quiet was different here. Not heavy, not watchful, just quiet. My phone buzzed as if on cue. Paige. I let it ring. Then my mother. Then my father. By mid-morning, there were 6 missed calls and a string of messages ranging from pleading to furious. I didn't read them. I forwarded everything to Mary Ann and muted the thread. At 11, Lucas called. "We're ready," he said. "Closing is scheduled for Friday morning." Friday. 2 days away. "Will they know before then?" I asked. "No," he said, "unless someone tips them off, and we've kept this tight." I thanked him and hung up. For the first time in weeks, my hands stopped shaking. That afternoon, I went into the office to clear out personal items. Elaine met me at the door. "I heard," she said quietly. I stiffened. "About what?" "The house," she said. "And your parents." I waited. She sighed. "They came by again this morning. Security turned them away. I told them not to return." A swell of relief washed through me. "Thank you." She studied me for a moment. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. You look steadier." I almost laughed. Steadier wasn't a word anyone had ever used for me before. On Thursday evening, my parents made their final attempt. They didn't knock. They waited. I saw their car parked across the street from my old house when I drove by after work, headlights off, engine running. Watching, waiting for me to come home. I didn't stop. I drove straight to my new place, parked in the back, and went inside without turning on the lights. From the dark, I watched my phone light up. A voicemail from my father. "Enough games," he said. "Come home. We need to talk now." I deleted it. At 9:47 that night, there was a knock at my new door. My heart jumped, but my feet stayed planted. The knock came again, softer this time. "Claire," my mother called, her voice trembling. "We know you're in there." I didn't move. "We just want to talk," she said. "No lawyers, no fighting." Silence stretched. Then my father's voice, low and sharp. "If you don't open this door, you're making a very big mistake." I stepped back from the door phone, already in my hand, thumb hovering over the screen. Mary Ann had told me to call if it escalated. It had. I didn't call the police. I called Lucas. "They found me," I said quietly. There was a pause. "Are you safe?" "Yes." "Do you want me to move the signing to tomorrow morning?" he asked. "Yes," I said without hesitation. By the time my parents left empty-handed and furious, the course of my life had already shifted. I barely slept that night. At 6:30 the next morning, I put on a clean blouse, tied my hair back, and drove to the title office. The building was nondescript beige brick and glass, the kind of place where lives changed quietly every day. The buyers were already there, calm, smiling, unaware of the storm they were inheriting. Lucas greeted me with a nod. "Ready?" I thought of my parents' faces pressed tight with expectation, of Paige's accusation, of my grandmother's steady hands. "Yes," I said, "I am." The signing took less than an hour. Pages flipped, pens moved, numbers spelled out in ink that felt unreal until the final signature settled on the page. When it was done, Lucas shook my hand. "Congratulations." I didn't feel celebratory. I felt free. My phone buzzed as I walked back to my car. A message from my mother. "We're at the house. Where are you?" I got into the driver's seat, closed the door, and for the first time allowed myself a small smile. You'll find out soon, I thought. But I didn't text back. I drove to my new place, made a cup of coffee, and sat on the bare floor, sunlight spilling across the empty room. At noon, my phone rang again. This time it was my neighbor from the old street, Mrs. Caldwell. "They're outside," she said breathlessly. "Your parents. They're trying the door. Claire, the locks don't work for them." I closed my eyes. "Thank you for calling," I said. A minute later, another call came in. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Then another. And another. Finally, a text from Paige. "What did you do?" I didn't answer. At 2:15 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed with a single new voicemail notification. I played it. My father's voice came through, stripped of control, raw with disbelief. "The police are here," he said. "They're saying the house isn't ours, that it's been sold, that we have to leave." He paused, breath heavy. "What did you do?" I set the phone down. Outside my new window, the world moved on. Cars passed. A child laughed somewhere down the block, the ordinary sounds of a life that no longer belonged to them. They had always believed I would fold. They had never imagined I would walk away and take everything with me. And as the afternoon light shifted across the floor, I realized something else, something sharper and more dangerous than relief. They weren't finished, but neither was I. I didn't answer the calls. Not my father's, Not my mother's, not Paige's. I watched the phone light up, go dark, light up again, until the vibrations felt distant like something happening in another room. Mrs. Caldwell called back an hour later. They left, she said, but it wasn't quiet. The police had to walk them to the car. I thanked her and hung up. For a long time after that, I just sat there on the floor of my new living room back against the wall, coffee untouched beside me. My body felt strange, like it didn't know what to do now that the emergency had passed. Adrenaline without a target. Years of vigilance suddenly unemployed. I thought it would feel triumphant. It didn't. It felt like standing on the edge of something vast and unfamiliar, the way it feels when you finally leave a place that hurt you and realize the pain was the map you'd been using to navigate. By early evening, the messages shifted. My mother's texts stopped crying and started bargaining. "We can work this out. You've made your point. Your father is very unwell. Come home and let's talk like a family." My father's messages were shorter, sharper. "This isn't over. You can't do this to us. We will fix this." Paige didn't text at all. That silence worried me more than the shouting. At 8:30, there was a knock at my door. I froze. Then I remembered where I was. Different street, different locks, different life. I checked the peephole. A man in his late 40s stood outside, hands visible, posture neutral. Plain jacket, no badge but a clipped calm that didn't belong to family drama. I opened the door a few inches. "Claire Lawson," he asked. "Yes. My name is Deputy Aaron Whitcomb," he said. "I'd like to speak with you regarding a disturbance reported earlier today." My stomach tightened, but I stepped aside and let him in. He stayed near the door, respectful. "Your parents attempted to enter a property that is no longer in their name. There was no arrest, but there was confusion." "That's one word for it," I said. He nodded slightly. "They claimed you had acted without notice, that they were entitled to access. And the records are clear," he said. "The property was sold legally. They were informed and escorted away." I let out a slow breath. He looked at me more closely then. "They were emotional, angry. They mentioned finding you." "I've cut contact," I said. "That's wise," he replied. "I'm not here to alarm you, but if they continue to show up uninvited or threaten you, you should document everything." "I have an attorney," I said. "Good," he said. "If things escalate, you may want to consider a formal harassment report." After he left, I locked the door and leaned against it, heart racing. So this was the next phase. The house had been their leverage. Without it, all they had left was pressure. And pressure had always been their specialty. The next morning, Paige finally reached out, not by text, by email. The subject line read, "We need to talk before this gets worse." I opened it slowly. She wrote that Mom wasn't eating, that Dad hadn't slept, that the family was being talked about, that relatives were asking questions, that I'd humiliated them. She wrote that she understood I was hurt, but I'd gone too far, that selling the house while they were temporarily displaced was cruel, that Grandma would be ashamed. That sentence made my hands shake. I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I forwarded the email to Marianne. Her response came an hour later. "They are attempting to reframe consequences as abuse. Do not engage emotionally. If you respond at all, keep it factual and brief." So I did. I replied with 4 sentences. "The sale was legal and final. Your belongings are intact. I will not discuss this further. Please direct any communication through my attorney." I closed my laptop and went for a walk. The neighborhood around my rental was quiet, tree-lined, ordinary, in a way that felt grounding. People walked dogs. A woman watered her lawn. A couple argued quietly over which groceries to carry. No one knew me here. That anonymity felt like oxygen. When I came back, there were 3 missed calls from my mother and 1 voicemail from my father. I listened to his. His voice was different. Low, controlled, dangerous in its calm. "You think you've won," he said, "but you've made enemies you don't understand. Family doesn't forgive this kind of betrayal." I deleted it. That night I dreamed of my grandmother's house again. But this time, it wasn't dissolving. It was empty, clean windows, open sunlight moving freely across the floor, peaceful, released. When I woke, I felt something solid beneath the grief. Resolve. 2 days later, Marianne called. "They've contacted my office," she said. My heart skipped. "About what?" "They want to contest the sale," she said. "They believe you acted in bad faith. They are claiming emotional distress." I waited. "They have no standing," she continued. "No claim, no evidence, but they're angry enough to try." "Can they?" I asked. "They can file," she said. "It will go nowhere, but it will cost them time and money." I pictured my parents, their sense of entitlement colliding with reality. "Let them," I said. There was a pause. Then Marianne said, "I want you to be prepared. When this fails, they may look for other ways to regain control." "What does that mean?" I asked. It means, she said carefully, that people who lose power sometimes try to rewrite the narrative. They may tell stories. They may reach out to your workplace. They may attempt to isolate you. My chest tightened. I'm already isolated, I said quietly. No, she replied. You're independent. There's a difference. That evening, Elaine called me into her office again. I want you to hear this from me first, she said. Your parents called the board. I closed my eyes. They accused you of being unstable, she continued, of making impulsive financial decisions, of acting under undue influence. And I told them that your personal affairs are not the board's concern, she said, and that if they contact us again, we'll pursue a restraining order. I swallowed hard. Thank you. She looked at me gently. You don't have to earn safety, Claire. That night I cried for the first time since the sale. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady tears that came from somewhere deep and tired. I cried for the family I'd tried to save, for the version of myself that thought love was measured by how much you endured, for the years I spent believing that being chosen meant being used. When the tears stopped, I felt lighter, clearer. They were going to keep pushing, but they no longer had a place in my life to push from. And somewhere beneath the exhaustion and the fear, a new understanding settled in. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my right to exist without permission. And I was only halfway through. The lawsuit arrived on a Monday, not in person, not with drama, just a thick envelope delivered to my office reception. My name typed neatly on the front like this was any other professional correspondence. Elaine had it waiting on my desk when I came in. They sent this to us, she said, her mouth tight. I didn't open it. I thanked her, closed my office door, and sat down slowly. My hands didn't shake this time. That surprised me. Inside was exactly what Marianne had predicted. A civil filing intent, emotional harm, undue influence, elder manipulation twisted so clumsily it would have been laughable if it hadn't been my parents' handwriting behind it. They were claiming my grandmother had been pressured, that I had isolated her, that I had orchestrated everything. I stared at the words for a long time. Then I called Marianne. She sighed softly when I read the first paragraph aloud. I was hoping they'd cool off, she said, but this is consistent with people who've never been told no. What happens now? I asked. Now we respond, she said, and we respond with facts. By Wednesday, she had assembled everything. Medical records showing my grandmother's full cognitive capacity, witness statements, prior drafts of the will, notes from their meetings together, dates, signatures, documentation layered so thoroughly it felt like armor. She anticipated this, Marianne said quietly. She prepared for it. I felt something swell in my chest, gratitude, sadness, pride. By the end of the week, the lawsuit was dead before it even breathed. Dismissed for lack of standing. No hearing, no spectacle. Just a formal notice that their claims were unsupported and closed. I expected rage. What I didn't expect was silence. Days passed, then a week. No calls, no texts, no surprise visits. Paige didn't reach out. My parents vanished. The quiet unsettled me more than the threats ever had. It was Marianne who named it. They're regrouping. She was right. The regrouping didn't come from my parents directly. It came from my aunt, my father's older sister Linda, the family historian, the one who collected stories like currency and distributed them strategically at holidays. She called me on a Sunday afternoon, voice syrupy with concern. I heard what happened, she said. It's all so tragic. What part? I asked. She ignored that. Your parents are devastated. They're telling people you've changed. I smiled faintly. I have. She sighed dramatically. You know how this looks. To whom? I asked. To everyone, she said. Selling your grandmother's house out from under your parents. Locking them out. Involving the police. I didn't involve the police, I said. They did. A pause. Then softer. Sweetheart families don't survive this kind of thing. Something inside me clicked. They didn't survive it, I corrected. I did. Her tone sharpened. You're being very cold. No, I said. I'm being very clear. She hung up shortly after. That night, I sat on the floor of my rental back against the couch and finally understood what was happening. They weren't trying to get the house back anymore. They were trying to punish me. At work, the whispers began. Subtle. Not accusations, just questions wrapped in concern. Elaine shut them down quickly, but I could feel the shift. The way people watched me a little more closely. The way reputation could bruise even when it wasn't broken. That was when I made my next decision. I stopped hiding. I didn't tell my story to everyone. I didn't post anything. I didn't defend myself publicly. I told the truth to exactly 3 people. Elaine, Marianne, and Lucas. Not the emotional version, the factual one. Here's what happened. Here's what I did. Here's why. Lucas nodded slowly when I finished. They underestimated you, he said. So did I admitted. The following Friday, Elaine asked me to stay after a team meeting. I want you to hear this privately, she said. The board reviewed your promotion again. My heart jumped despite myself. They're reinstating it, she said. Effective next quarter. I let out a breath that felt like it came from my spine. They also approved a new role, she continued. One that removes you from client-facing vulnerability. Strategic development. You'd be harder to reach. Protected. The word echoed. I'd like that, I said. That night, Paige finally broke the silence. She showed up at my door. No warning, no call. Just her standing there, arms wrapped around herself, eyes rimmed red. She looked smaller than I remembered. Tired. I didn't know where else to go, she said. I considered closing the door. Instead, I stepped aside. She sat on the couch, hands twisting together. They're not okay, she said. They're blaming you for everything. I know, I said. They're telling people you manipulated Grandma, she whispered, that you turned her against them. I met her eyes. Do you believe that? She hesitated, too long. That's your answer, I said gently. Her shoulders slumped. They're scared. So was I said, for years. She looked around my empty living room. You really left. Yes, and you're not coming back, she said. No. Something flickered across her face, not anger, not sadness. Understanding. They don't know how to live without controlling someone, she said quietly. I nodded. Neither did I. She stayed for an hour. We talked carefully, avoiding landmines. When she left, she hugged me awkwardly at the door. I don't know where I fit now, she said. That's not my job to solve, I replied. Not unkindly, just honestly. After she left, I locked the door and leaned against it. I wasn't the villain in their story, but I wasn't available to play the role anymore. And that I realized was the real revenge. Not the house, not the money, not the silence. It was the moment they lost access to me. And for the first time, I slept through the night without dreaming of doors being forced open. The first letter arrived 3 weeks later. Not a lawsuit, not a threat, just a thin envelope with my name typed in block letters and no return address. I recognized my mother's handwriting immediately, even though she'd tried to disguise it. The careful slant. The pressure too heavy on certain letters, like she was holding the pen tighter than necessary. I didn't open it right away. I set it on the kitchen counter and made myself dinner. I washed the dishes. I wiped the counters down twice. I let the evening stretch long enough that the fear had time to fade into something dull and manageable. When I finally opened it, there was no apology inside. There never was. She wrote about how hurt they were, about how abandoned they felt, about how people were talking, about how unfair it was that I had cut them out without considering the consequences to everyone else. There was a paragraph about how my grandmother would have wanted harmony, another about how stress was affecting my father's health, and at the end, the hook she had always used when nothing else worked. If you come home and explain this, we can still fix things. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. Then I did something I'd never done before. I didn't respond at all. The second letter came a week later, shorter, sharper, accusatory. It suggested that if I didn't correct the narrative, they would have no choice but to protect themselves from further damage to their reputation. That one went straight into the documentation folder. The third letter never came. Instead, the rumors reached me another way. A colleague from a different department stopped me near the elevators one morning. She hesitated before speaking the way people do when they're deciding whether to cross a line. I hope this isn't inappropriate, she said. But is everything okay with your family? I smiled politely. Why do you ask? She flushed. I heard things, that your parents are having a hard time. I'm sure they are, I said. Change can be difficult. She nodded, embarrassed, and hurried away. I didn't feel exposed. I felt prepared. That afternoon, Elaine called me into her office again. She didn't waste time. They've contacted Human Resources, she said. I nodded once. I expected that. They're alleging emotional instability, she continued. Poor judgment, that your personal life is interfering with your work. And I asked. Elaine slid a folder across the desk. Inside were my performance reviews, commendations, emails from clients, metrics that told a very different story. I shut it down, she said. HR did their due diligence. They're satisfied. I exhaled slowly. Elaine leaned back. I want you to understand something. People who lose control often try to weaponize institutions. It only works if the institutions don't know who you really are. That night, I sat alone in my living room, the hum of the refrigerator filling the quiet. I thought about how many years I'd spent believing that if my family turned against me, the world would follow. They had trained me to believe that. But the world was bigger than them. 2 days later, Paige called. She sounded different, less frantic, more tired. They're talking about moving, she said. Where I asked, I don't know, she replied. Anywhere they can start over without people asking questions. I pictured my parents packing boxes, telling themselves a story where they were victims forced out by an ungrateful daughter. A story that absolved them of responsibility. "Are you going with them?" I asked. She was quiet for a long moment. "I don't think so," she said finally. "I'm tired, Claire." I understood that kind of tired. "They keep asking me to talk to you," she added. "To convince you to apologize, to make a statement, to say you overreacted." "And what do you think?" I asked. Another pause. Then softly, "I think they don't know how to live without someone to blame." Something loosened in my chest. "I can't fix that for them," I said. "I know," she replied. We hung up without promises. The next development came from an unexpected place. My grandmother's old neighbor, Mrs. Keller, stopped me in the grocery store. She was pushing a cart full of discounted produce, her white hair tucked neatly under a scarf. "I've been meaning to find you," she said, gripping my arm gently. "I'm so glad I did." She lowered her voice. "Your parents came by the house after you sold it. They were unpleasant, demanding. The new owners were shaken." My stomach tightened. "Are they okay?" "They're fine," she said, "but they asked questions about you, about your grandmother." I felt a familiar chill. Mrs. Keller patted my hand. "Your grandmother told me years ago this might happen. She asked me to remember certain things." My breath caught. "What things?" She said if anyone ever questioned her choices, Mrs. Keller said slowly to tell the truth. That she trusted you because you were the only one who never asked her for anything. Tears burned my eyes, sudden and sharp. "She said you listened," Mrs. Keller continued. "That you let her be herself. That she wasn't afraid with you." I swallowed hard. "Thank you." As Mrs. Keller walked away, I stood there gripping the cart surrounded by fluorescent lights and the ordinary noise of a weekday afternoon, feeling something settle into place. They could rewrite the story all they wanted. The truth existed outside of them. That evening, Marianne called. "They're done," she said. "Legally. There's nothing else they can do." I leaned back against the couch phone, warm against my ear. "That doesn't mean they'll stop." "No," she agreed, "but it means you don't have to respond anymore." After we hung up, I turned my phone off completely for the first time in months. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of space. I sat there breathing, thinking about who I was becoming without constant interference, about the way my days had begun to stretch out again, no longer dominated by crisis management. For years I had measured my worth by how much I could endure. Now I was measuring it by how much peace I could protect. And somewhere deep inside I felt it. The shift from surviving to choosing. They had taken so much from me over the years, but this time they would leave with nothing. Not my house, not my reputation, not my future. And in that quiet certainty, I understood the final twist of it all. The revenge wasn't loud. It was permanent. The move happened without ceremony. No farewell tour. No last drive past familiar places. Just a quiet Saturday morning when I loaded the remaining boxes into my car and handed the keys of the rental back to the property manager with a polite smile. I had already signed the paperwork for a small condo across town, closer to work, farther from memory. It wasn't permanent. It didn't have to be. It was simply mine. The building was unremarkable in the best possible way. Brick exterior, neutral hallways, a security door that required a code and didn't open just because someone knocked hard enough. When I stepped inside my new place, the echo felt different. Not hollow, open. I unpacked slowly, deliberately. I put my grandmother's recipe cards into a drawer in the kitchen. I hung a single framed photo of us on the wall by the window. I left the rest blank. That night I slept with the windows open and the lights off, listening to distant traffic and the low murmur of other people living their lives around me. No footsteps pacing outside my door. No phone buzzing on the counter. No sense that I needed to be alert. On Monday morning, I started my new role. Strategic development sat on the quiet side of the office, away from reception, away from client traffic. Elaine had been right. I was harder to reach now, more insulated. My work became about patterns and long-term planning instead of constant emotional labor. I found that I was good at it, better than I'd expected. By Wednesday, I realized something else. No one was asking me about my family anymore. The rumors had run their course. Without fresh drama, they withered. People moved on to new scandals, new gossip, new distractions. My parents' story had lost its audience. That was when the email came. Not from my parents, not from Paige. From a woman named Sarah Mendel. The subject line read, "Question regarding Eleanor Lawson." My heart stuttered once before settling. I opened it carefully. Sarah wrote that she was a legal assistant at a small firm in another county. That she was conducting a routine follow-up related to an estate matter from several years ago, that she'd come across my grandmother's name while organizing archived files and wanted to confirm a detail. It was vague, professional, almost forgettable, but something in my chest tightened. I forwarded it to Marianne with a single line. "Do you know her?" Marianne called me within 10 minutes. "I was hoping this wouldn't come up," she said. My fingers curled around the phone. "Come up how?" She exhaled slowly. "Your grandmother consulted another attorney before she came to me. Briefly, very briefly. About the will, I asked. About protection, Marianne replied, specifically about safeguarding assets from coercion." A chill moved through me. What kind of coercion? "She believed your parents were already applying pressure," Marianne said. "Financial, emotional. She wanted to document it." I closed my eyes. Marianne continued. "The file was never pursued because she decided to work with me instead. But there may be records, notes." "And Sarah?" I asked. "She's likely cleaning up old files," Marianne said. "But if your parents are looking for angles, they may have prompted this." My stomach tightened. "Can they use it?" "No," Marianne said firmly. "If anything, it strengthens your position. But it tells me something else." "What?" I asked. "They're still digging," she said. "And they're getting sloppy." I replied to Sarah politely, confirming my identity and asking what information she needed. Her response came an hour later. She wanted to know whether my grandmother had ever expressed concern about family pressure. I stared at the screen, pulse steady. This wasn't a trap. It was a door. I wrote back carefully. "Yes, she did. She took steps to protect herself and her estate. If you need documentation, please contact my attorney." I copied Marianne. The reply came the next morning. "Thank you, that answers my question." And just like that, it was over. Whatever angle my parents had hoped to find collapsed quietly, without confrontation, without drama. Another thread cut. That evening, Paige showed up again. She didn't knock this time. She texted. "Can we talk? I promise I won't push." I hesitated, then agreed to meet her at a cafe halfway between us. Public, neutral, boundaried. She looked different when she walked in. Less polished, more real. She ordered tea instead of her usual sugary drink and wrapped her hands around the cup like she needed the warmth. "They're leaving town," she said. I waited. "They signed a lease in another state," she continued. "A small place. They're telling people it's a fresh start." "Is it?" I asked. She gave a tired smile. "For them, maybe." "And you?" I asked. She shook her head. "I'm staying. I got a job offer. It's not glamorous, but it's mine." I studied her face, searching for the familiar manipulation. I didn't see it. "They're angry with you," she said softly. "They always will be." "I know," I replied. "They're angry with me too," she admitted, "because I didn't stop you." That surprised me. She looked up, then eyes clear. "I didn't stop you because part of me knew you were right, and because I didn't want to be the next one they turned on." I nodded. "That's how it works." We sat in silence for a moment, the low hum of conversation around us. "I don't know what we are now," she said finally. "We're adults," I said. "We get to choose." She swallowed. "Can we try just us?" I considered it carefully. "Yes," I said slowly. Relief flickered across her face. When we stood to leave, she hugged me briefly. No guilt, no weight, just contact. As I walked back to my car, I realized something else had shifted. I wasn't bracing anymore. The threats had lost their edge. The fear had dulled into memory. My parents were moving away, taking their chaos with them, leaving behind a silence that finally felt earned. At home that night, I cooked a simple dinner and ate it standing at the counter, sunlight fading through the window. I thought about my grandmother, about how carefully she had laid the groundwork, about how much courage it must have taken to see the truth and act on it quietly. I had inherited more than a house. I had inherited her clarity. And as I washed the dishes and turned off the lights, I understood the last piece of it. They hadn't lost because I took something from them. They lost because I stopped giving. And that was something they could never take back. The quiet didn't arrive all at once. It seeped in slowly in pieces I didn't recognize at first. Mornings without dread, evenings without my phone face down on the counter like a threat. The absence of that constant internal countdown waiting for the next demand. I noticed it one Tuesday when I left work on time and realized I had nowhere I needed to rush to. No call to return, no apology to prepare, no story to manage. I sat in my car in this parking garage longer than necessary. Engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel, and felt something close to disbelief. This was what normal felt like. 2 weeks after my parents left town, Marianne called again. Not with urgency this time, with closure. "They've withdrawn everything," she said. "No further filings, no appeals, no correspondence." I leaned back in my chair. "That's it. That's it," she confirmed. "They're done." After we hung up, I didn't celebrate. I didn't cry. I just sat there letting the finality sink into my bones. Done. For years, that word had never applied to them. Every argument circled back. Every boundary bent. Every resolution was temporary, but this time there was nothing left for them to grab onto. They had exhausted their leverage. That evening, I walked through my condo with a new awareness. The way my footsteps sounded on the floor, the way the air moved when I opened a window, the way the space responded only to me. I rearranged the living room on impulse, sliding the couch closer to the window, angling the chair toward the light. No one commented, no one objected, no one asked why. It felt quietly radical. A few days later, Elaine invited me to lunch, not as my supervisor, as a person. We sat at a small restaurant near the office, sunlight bouncing off the metal tables outside. She ordered a salad. I ordered soup. The conversation drifted easily at first work and weather and the general exhaustion of adulthood. Then she looked at me more seriously. "I want to say this carefully," she said, "because it's not something managers are taught to say." I waited. "I watched you change over the last few months," she continued. "Not just professionally, personally." I nodded, unsure where this was going. "You stopped apologizing," she said. "You stopped flinching." I smiled faintly. I didn't realize it was that obvious. "It is," she said, "to people who know what to look for." I stirred my soup slowly. "It wasn't intentional at first." "It rarely is," she replied, "but it's permanent when it sticks." That word again. Permanent. When I got home that night, there was a small package waiting at my door. No return address. My name written neatly. Inside was my grandmother's old watch. The one she used to wind every night before bed. The one she wore until her hands started shaking too much. I hadn't seen it since the funeral. There was a note tucked beneath it, written in Paige's handwriting. "I found this while packing. I think she wanted you to have it." Nothing else. I sat down at the kitchen table and turned the watch over in my hands. The leather strap was worn smooth, the face slightly scratched. When I held it to my ear, I could still hear the faint ticking. "Steady, patient." I put it on my wrist. The following week, something unexpected happened. I missed them. Not the reality of them, not the manipulation or the tension or the fear. I missed the idea of parents. The version I'd been chasing my whole life. The fantasy that if I just tried harder, gave more, stayed smaller, they would finally turn toward me with warmth instead of expectation. Grief doesn't ask permission. It arrives when it's ready. One evening, after a long day, I found myself sitting on the floor of my bedroom, back against the bed, tears slipping down without warning. Not sobbing, just leaking like something that had been under pressure for too long. I let it happen. I didn't shame myself for it. I didn't rush to fix it. I let the grief move through me like weather. When it passed, I felt clearer, lighter. The next morning, I booked a therapy appointment. Not because I was falling apart, but because I didn't want to build my future on unexamined damage. The therapist was a woman in her early 60s with kind eyes and a voice that didn't rush. She listened as I told the story. Not every detail, just the shape of it. When I finished, she nodded. "You didn't lose your family," she said. "You outgrew a system that required your suffering to function." That sentence stayed with me. At work, the new role began to take shape. I was invited into meetings where long-term decisions were made. I spoke more. I hesitated less. When I disagreed, I did so calmly without the reflex to soften my voice or over-explain. People listened. One afternoon, a junior colleague stopped by my desk. "I hope this isn't weird," she said, "but you seem confident lately." I smiled. "I am." "How?" she asked. I considered the question. "I stopped negotiating my worth," I said simply. She nodded, thoughtful, and walked away. That night, I stood at my window and watched the city lights blink on one by one. I thought about my parents in their new place, wherever that was. I wondered if they were telling the story differently now, if they still painted me as the villain, if they still waited for me to come back and fix things. Then I realized something that made me laugh softly. It didn't matter. They no longer lived in my decisions. They no longer occupied my future. The revenge I'd imagined, once fiery and dramatic, had turned out to be something else entirely. It was quiet. It was durable. It was built out of days like this where nothing went wrong and nothing needed to be defended. And as I turned off the lights and went to bed, my grandmother's watch ticking softly on my wrist, I understood the truth I'd been circling for months. The story wasn't about what I took from them. It was about what I finally kept. The message arrived on a Thursday night just as I was turning off the lamp beside my bed. Unknown number. For a split second, my body reacted before my mind did. A tightening in my chest. A familiar readiness. Old instincts don't disappear just because you've outgrown the danger. They linger, waiting to be proven unnecessary. I stared at the screen. "We need to talk. This isn't over." No name, no signature, but I knew exactly who it was from. "My father." I didn't reply. I set the phone face down and lay back against the pillows, listening to the quiet of my condo. the distant sound of a train horn, the hum of the building's heating system, the small, ordinary noises that had become the markers of safety. 10 minutes passed. Then another message. You can't just erase us, we deserve answers. I picked the phone up this time, not with dread, but with curiosity. There was something different about this. Not urgency, not rage. Desperation. For years he had controlled the timing, the tone, the narrative. He decided when conversations happened and how they ended. He withheld affection like leverage and distributed approval like currency. And now, for the first time, he was asking. I opened a new note and typed a response, then deleted it. Typed again, deleted. Finally, I wrote one sentence. All communication goes through my attorney. I sent it and turned the phone off. The next morning, Marianne called. They reached out, she said. Your father left a message. He wants mediation. I laughed softly, surprised by the sound. Mediation for what? For closure, she replied dryly. For understanding, for peace. And what did you tell him? I asked. That mediation requires consent from both parties, she said. And that consent is not implied. I thought for a moment. If I say yes, I asked what happens. He gets a room, a table, and an audience, Marianne said. Nothing more. And if I say no? Then the story ends exactly where it is, she replied. I thanked her and hung up. All day the question stayed with me. Not because I doubted my decision, but because I wanted to understand why his request unsettled me. That evening, I took a long walk through the neighborhood, letting the cool air clear my head. Trees lined the sidewalks, their leaves shifting with the breeze. Somewhere nearby, someone was cooking dinner. Garlic and onions drifted through the air. Ordinary life. I realized then what he was really asking for. Not reconciliation, relevance. As long as I refused to engage, he had no role left to play. No authority, no influence, no proof that he still mattered in the way he believed he should. Mediation wouldn't give me closure. It would give him oxygen. When I got home, I emailed Marianne. No mediation, no further contact. Her reply came minutes later. Understood, I'll inform him. 2 days passed without incident. Then Paige called. I hesitated before answering, but something told me this was different. I talked to Dad, she said quietly. He's not well. I leaned against the counter listening. In what way? Not sick, she clarified. Lost, angry. He doesn't know who he is without you pushing back. That made sense. He keeps saying you owe him a conversation, she continued. That you're being cruel by withholding it. I closed my eyes, and what do you think? She exhaled slowly. I think he's confusing consequences with cruelty. I smiled faintly. That's a big realization. Therapy helps, she said. Who knew? We talked for a while, cautiously but honestly, about how our parents were adjusting, about how strange it felt not to be managing their emotions anymore, about how uncomfortable freedom could be when you weren't used to it. Before we hung up, she said something that stayed with me. They don't miss you, she said. They miss who you used to be. After the call, I sat at the kitchen table and let that truth settle. They missed the version of me who absorbed impact, the one who apologized first, the one who made their lives easier by making her own smaller. That version was gone, and she wasn't coming back. The final attempt came a week later, not from my father, from my mother. A handwritten letter mailed this time, careful and deliberate. I recognized the stationery, pale blue, embossed at the corner, the kind she saved for important moments. I opened it slowly. This one was different. No accusations, no threats, no talk of family reputation. She wrote about loneliness, about regret, about not understanding where she had gone wrong. She wrote about how motherhood didn't come with instructions, how fear could make people do things they didn't recognize in themselves. She wrote that she missed me. Not what I did for her, not what I provided. Me. For a moment my chest ached, then I noticed what wasn't there. No apology, no accountability, no acknowledgement of harm, just longing. I folded the letter and set it beside my grandmother's watch on the table. I didn't tear it up. I didn't respond. Some truths don't require an answer. That night I dreamed of my grandmother again. She was standing in a garden I didn't recognize, sunlight filtering through leaves above her. She looked younger, stronger. She smiled at me the way she used to when I'd finally said something honest instead of polite. You did well, she said. When I woke, I felt calm. The kind of calm that doesn't come from certainty but from acceptance. At work, my days were full and focused. I led a project that required firm boundaries and clear decisions. I made them without flinching. The team responded with trust. In therapy, I talked about grief without trying to solve it, about anger without trying to justify it, about love without obligation. My therapist nodded and said, "You're not healing to go back, you're healing to go forward." One afternoon as I left the office, I caught my reflection in the glass door. I looked the same face, same posture, but my eyes were different, steadier, I wasn't waiting for permission anymore. The people who raised me had tried to write my ending. They had failed. And as the week drew to a close, I understood something with a clarity that felt almost gentle. There would be no final showdown, no dramatic confrontation, no moment where they suddenly understood everything and changed. This was the ending. Quiet, uneventful, firm. The kind of ending that only looks small if you don't understand how hard it was to reach. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. The anniversary came quietly. No reminder on my phone. No date circled on a calendar. It arrived the way most real milestones do, slipping into an ordinary morning when I was halfway through making coffee and realized my body felt light. 1 year, 1 full year since the house sold. Since the locks were changed. Since my parents stood on a porch that no longer belonged to them, holding keys that no longer opened anything in my life. I carried my mug to the window and watched the city wake up. Cars moved through the intersection below. A woman walked her dog, stopping to check her phone. Somewhere a siren wailed and faded. The world was doing what it always did, indifferent to personal revolutions. That was the point. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt whole. Later that morning I took the day off. Not because I needed rest, but because I wanted to mark the day in my own way. I drove to a small nursery on the edge of town, the kind that smelled like damp soil and green things. I walked the rows slowly, letting my hands brush leaves, reading little plastic tags without really absorbing the information. Lavender caught my eye. I smiled at the coincidence. I bought 3 plants and drove home with the windows down, the scent filling the car. In the small patch of earth behind my condo, I knelt and dug holes with my hands, dirt collecting under my nails. I pressed the roots gently into the soil, firmed it around them, and watered them slowly. It felt ceremonial without being dramatic. As I stood up brushing dirt from my jeans, my grandmother's watch caught the light on my wrist. It ticked softly, steady, and unconcerned. Time hadn't punished me. It had given me space. That afternoon, Paige called. Not with urgency, not with guilt. Just to check in. They moved again, she said casually. Smaller place, farther out. How are you? I asked. She paused. Better than I expected. We talked about work, about her new routines, about neutral things that didn't require translating emotion or navigating landmines. When we hung up, there was no heaviness in my chest, no sense of unfinished business. We were building something new, carefully, slowly, honestly. That evening, I cooked dinner and ate it at the counter, music playing softly in the background. I caught myself humming along and laughed when I realized how rare that used to be. Afterward, I sat on the couch with a book I'd been meaning to finish for months. I read for hours without checking my phone, without scanning my thoughts for potential fallout. Peace had become my baseline. Before bed, I pulled out the old documentation folder. The letters, the messages, the legal notices. I flipped through them one last time, not with pain, but with distance. Then I closed the folder and slid it into the back of a drawer. Not destroyed, just no longer needed. In therapy the following week, my therapist asked a simple question. If they showed up tomorrow and apologized sincerely, what would you do? I considered it. I'd listen, I said, and then I'd decide. She nodded. That's the difference. For most of my life, decisions had been something that happened to me. Reactions to pressure, adjustments to keep the peace, sacrifices framed as love. Now choice felt natural, earned. At work, I was offered a chance to mentor younger employees, women who reminded me of myself years ago, capable, anxious, too quick to apologize. I didn't tell them my story. I didn't need to. I showed them what it looked like to speak clearly, to say no without explanation, to take up space without bracing for punishment. One of them said to me once, "You make it seem possible." I smiled and said it is. On the drive home that night, I thought about the word revenge. It had meant something different to me once. A sharp moment, a visible loss, proof that the people who hurt me finally felt it. But real revenge hadn't looked like that at all. It looked like waking up without fear. It looked like silence where manipulation used to live. It looked like being unreachable to people who only knew how to take. My parents still existed somewhere. They still told their version of the story. They still believed I was sure that they had been wronged. But their beliefs no longer shaped my reality. And that was the part they would never recover from. Late that night, as I turned off the lights and lay down, I thought about the woman I had been at the beginning of all this, standing in a kitchen listening to a dripping sink and a conversation she was never meant to hear. She had thought the worst thing had just happened to her. She had been wrong. The worst thing had already been happening for years. What she overheard had simply given it a name. And names have power. If you're listening to this right now, folding laundry, driving home, sitting in your own quiet kitchen, I want you to hear this part clearly. Being excluded doesn't mean you're unworthy. Being called difficult doesn't mean you're wrong. Being labeled selfish doesn't mean you took too much. Sometimes it means you finally stopped giving away pieces of yourself that were never owed. I wasn't a leech. I was a woman who grew up in a family that mistook access for love and obedience for loyalty. Walking away wasn't cruelty. It was integrity. And if you've ever stood at that same edge wondering whether choosing yourself will cost you everything, let me tell you the truth I learned the hard way. It cost you the illusion. What you gain is your life. If this story resonated with you, if you've lived your own version of silence, betrayal, or awakening, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me what integrity means to you or where you're listening from right now. And if you want more stories like this, stories about justice, karma, and finding your way back to yourself, don't forget to subscribe. Some endings are loud. The best ones are quiet.